Hey folks, welcome back. Path to Recovery Podcast, episode 40 today. Our cruise through 2020 is the topic, but I'm here with Laura Lee. She's going to talk with me about what's happened in 2020.
Hi, guys.
Yeah, that's nice. Introduce yourself. Anytime. Due to the length of this podcast, we're going to be separating it into two parts. You're listening currently to part one. Part two will be available to you at the end of this portion of the podcast. You'll get a nice little pop-up on your screen that'll allow you to click directly to the next link, taking you immediately to part two. So we're going to get into our cruise through the year 2020 because it's been so adverse for everybody in so many different ways. And people that are going through the struggles of recovery or addictions of any sort and the darkness and the struggles of whatever we're calling this 2020 year, the COVID year, whatever.
It's the year of clarity.
The year of clarity.
2020.
And why? Why is
Clear
it the year of
vision.
clarity?
I think it's probably because it feels like a polar opposite. Nothing felt very clear.
Right.
If you're not really focused on whatever it is in life that you're actually striving for or going after.
So then we as everybody, had to actually focus on being clear because everything's so unclear.
Yeah.
So it's in our best interest as humans to be able to get a clearer picture how we cope and deal with something as bizarre as this quote-unquote pandemic thing, right?
Yeah, I think everybody had their own opinions, has their own opinions. So apparently it's not over yet. But for me, it did not work the way that it did with a lot of folks. COVID was, for me, it was an eye-opening experience.
Yeah.
And I only mean that in the sense that, when they first started talking about this pandemic or this virus that China has, it wasn't here.
Yeah.
And of course, it's like every other thing. You get some kind of bug and then somebody's taking a plane and they've come over to the United States and then somebody's got something and they got something else.
It's just like the movie The Stand from Stephen King.
Oh, right.
The exact same scenario. Somebody sneezed on somebody and they brought it over on a plane.
Right. Well, it's like the Night of the Walking Dead or,
The Walking
Dead itself. Isn't that kind of...
Yeah. I mean, that's what's been played in our theaters for the last 40 years, maybe 50 years. Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead and all those black and white horror flicks were all about zombie apocalypse.
Well, and even The Walking Dead that came about, several years ago, you know.
So let's turn back the clock because this is talking about our cruise through 2020. So we don't want to get into the main character, COVID. All right. We're going to get into what brought us to 2020 and how did everything happen for us? How did it unfold? If you guys don't know, Laura Lee and I are a partner. We're a couple, a spiritual couple. We are divine beings. We are holy beings, and we share a lot of God. So for us, we've been spending a lot of time together, probably more time than most humans would spend as a couple because I was working with her.
And we like each other.
Yeah, we like each other.
We still like each other and appreciate each other. So I think that's the point is bringing God into our relationship.
Yeah.
God was first in me, and then Bear came along and found that it was first in him.
Right. So about this time, or a little bit earlier than this time last year, 2019, we're getting into the winter. We're thinking about... So folks, Laura Lee used to run a Segway business, and I was one of the tour guides. So we had that going, and we were looking into 2020, and both of us were kind of getting, we'll call it old.
It's winter
Tired,
season. Both of us get kind of
sore.
I get cold, you know.
My lower back started coming up with a serious problem when I rode. So I think we were hemming and hawing about what we were going to do in 2020.
Well, I knew that, Bear had me starting to work out a lot more, so my legs were getting back in shape, and I was thinking, Bear's not going to ride anymore, so I got to ride more, which means I better be in really good shape, and I got to do the right things, eat good, take care of myself, and when it comes to spring, I'm going to be overloaded.
Right, because our spring season was historically our insane 7 weeks.
Epic.
Absolutely, like 5-6 tours a day per person, and it was just rolling. So with me starting to fade away in the Segway rides and tours because of my physical thing, Laura Lee had to start possibly preparing to step up. So we're going into 2020, and my thoughts personally were, I'll be lucky if I make it through 2020. The way I'm feeling after doing 1 tour or 2 tours in a slower time frame wasn't feeling even good enough for me to say I want to do more than 2, let alone trying to do 4 or 5 tours in a day come springtime. So the fear setting in, what the heck is going to happen? Laura Lee's building on her physical parts. We're doing so much extra work for her plantar issue, her calf muscles loosening up and exercising and everything. And then how are you ready for 2020, or were you even ready for 2020?
Well, funny thing about 2020 is it's not unusual for me, even though running the Segway business, it's not unusual for me to get a part-time gig going to make sure that Bear was able to make the predominant amount of money through the winter. And so I figured I would get a part-time gig. That way it gave him plenty of mobility or ability to make the tours that did come in, so it wasn't taking away from him. Yet he was always very willing to give the opportunity to me because, his body was starting to hurt. But I figured it was probably in our best interest financially for me. I am financially driven, and I do like to be comfortable. That's just the truth. And in my old age and throughout all my years, I am about making money. Even in my addiction, that's who I have always been. So I decided to get a part-time gig, and I started working for this chocolate factory. And I tell you what, it was a lot of fun. So I wanted to make sure that monetarily that we were going to be taken care of. And because we are a partnership, I always want to make sure that we are taken care of.
Right.
And so that's always been a part of my controlling issues is I want to make sure that everything is steady and no glitches in the system.
Right. So in comes 2020, January, February, we're looking at the tours, and things aren't typically rolling the way they do, pun fully intended. Tours weren't coming in as aggressively preparing for the spring break.
Well, and a lot of things were happening because of the COVID-19 thing that had taken place like October, November into December.
Yep.
Now we're finding that people from other countries are not coming in. So a lot of our business was driven by other countries. It was global business.
Absolutely.
So when people were coming in, they just weren't coming in as heavily. We just weren't seeing, we're seeing a lot more local groups, which is perfectly fine. But the influx, even through the winter, it was strange. Everything just felt so different this year.
Yeah.
When we start getting into January and February, things are, the pandemic has hit and countries are starting to close down, and we don't know what it looks like for us.
And another thing is Sedona really didn't behave in the same way that everyone else was as far as what's closing here. Not quite. They jumped in eventually, but at the beginning, it wasn't like they shut down.
It took us about a month before. I mean, California, I think, was already in lockdown in about the February position.
Yeah.
And for us, Sedona itself was then mandated by March 31st that we were locked down. The whole city was locked down. And I did it gently because it's a little town.
A majority of all the businesses had to be locked down as per everywhere else in this country.
Except
for certain businesses that were mandatory, like grocery stores and so on. But a funny thing is that doing a Segway tour, you weren't actually going to be close to anybody except at the training point.
Yeah.
Other than that, doing the tour and everything else kept us within the boundaries of at the time, the COVID expectations, how to handle it. So we could actually stay open, and we did. We stayed open.
We did. We weren't making money.
We saw the spring break bookings pretty much all get canceled.
Yeah. Everything left and right. It was like one day after another or an hour from the next. Everything that we had pre-booked, and people would book up to 6 and 8 months in advance.
Yeah.
They were calling and canceling. And we didn't know what that looked like. And I know Bear didn't know what it looked like. And we're thinking, wow, do I need to get another job? I've got this part-time gig going, whatever. But when they went ahead and made the decision to shut us down at my job, I was just looking, to get some money, keep the money flow coming through because we really weren't making any money from Segway. So when we get the word that we're all closing down, now it's becoming to all the stores except for Essentials are closing. Essentials being food, of course, the stores, gas, everything else was being shut down.
Yeah.
It was one of those, wow, this is real.
Yeah.
So the illusion has now become profound. The countries are closing down and people are in a panic, and toilet paper was this huge issue. And I'm always one to stock up in advance so I don't have to wait for COVID to hit.
Right.
I'm one of those that I've got a lot of people in my family, so I always want to make sure that I look out after everybody. Once again, my control issues.
Right, control issues. So here we go, rolling into the heart of the COVID closing, and we're scooting into the early parts of summer. May's coming up, and we're kind of seeing the writing on the wall, and we're just hemming and hawing, going, man, do we close? Do we stay open? Do we close? I mean, there's really nobody's calling, and if they do, they're looking for a deal, and it's the environment had changed, and it just seemed so energetically depleted. at least for me, it was almost like everything's changing.
Well, everything absolutely changed. So we stayed closed down for a month, and then, of course, businesses opened back up very gently, of course. For Segway, we went into the office every day. Even my part-time gig, I would go in there. It was very everything was just so slow and so different. And Bear and I had to, wonder what this was going to look like from here on out. So during the lockdown, the interesting effect was we were still able to go to the store as usual. It wasn't like people were talking about how terrible it was to be locked down. And I found so much joy. I went hiking or walking with my grandchildren and my daughter, and Bear and I went out for hikes and little excursions. And we actually took our house and tore it upside down, taking shit out that we didn't need. Because spring cleaning was just what a beautiful time that was, and the dump happened to be open. So I'm cleaning out stuff that I've had forever and throwing it away.
So with regards to Segway, where were you come May and June? What was your mentality and your thinking?
Well, we opened back up in April, and so we're going through all that session. And in April, this is when everything starts changing. In April, we started to think, I wonder if this is viable. So when people were coming out, now it was a mask mandate. So people were having to wear masks. A lot of the tour companies weren't even open but us. And we have that viability because we were able to be 6 feet apart, at least 60 feet apart. So for me, I didn't know what life was going to look like for Segway anymore. And there was a part of me that honestly knew that summer was coming up. And I didn't know if I wanted to be out in 105 heat, taking care of people that were going to put a mask on and hoping that they didn't puke in the mask. I mean, to tell you the truth, people hyperventilate, they get scared, they don't know what they're doing, they've got to drink water.
That's without a mask.
And we got to glove up and mask up and be outside, and nobody knew what this was going to look like. So for me, I had to go to God. I truly did. I went to God and I said, I don't know what this looks like anymore.
Interesting how the emotion comes flooding back, huh?
I remember it.
Yeah.
So for me, I'd been at this business for 10 years, and I do have somewhat of a charge.
This was your baby.
Yeah, I built it.
This is your creation.
I absolutely built this baby up. And for me being a control freak, it was something I had to let go of. And I didn't know if I could let go. So when it gets into the end of April and the beginning of May, and people are coming in and they're wearing these masks, and you got to clean every pen, and not that it's a bad thing, but it's like everything felt like it was an overkill. You got to take your temperature and this, and there was like restrictions and guidelines and rules, and I've never been really good at following rules anyways, and when I went into the store, I didn't wear a freaking mask. I couldn't stand wearing a mask, and then it became like a mandated thing, and then you felt guilty if you didn't wear a mask, and I'm looking at these people come through the doors, and once we got into May and the beginning of June, there was people who had not been out of their homes since February.
Right.
And they were coming out to do tours, and they would not take off the mask.
Right, they'd come into the office fully. And they would even do paperwork outside because they didn't want nothing to do with an inside anything.
People had become so full of fear that I didn't have that same fear that they had. Not that I didn't have a fear, but my fear was so different.
Yeah. If you have no idea about what it takes to do Segway touring, it is not like throwing people in a Jeep or in a bus or in a van or anything. You actually have to focus on these people, their safety, their well-being. You're going to have a great time, but if you can't be on your game, then there's no reason to roll.
Yes.
And that's kind of what was happening.
People's lives. I think that the biggest transition point for me is people's lives are in your hands. And I was out doing a tour one day, and I could see and feel the anger in the people who were driving by with us on Segways, and the presence of people had changed.
Yeah.
People were no longer tolerable.
They were looking at us like we were demons. What are you doing? Why are you driving?
Why are you on the street?
Yeah.
People didn't want to be friendly anymore. Something in humans had changed.
Yeah.
We had missed the mark. Yeah. We were given a moment of time to open our eyes and to see, and we chose fear over clarity.
Yes. In a perfect year designed for clarity.
Yeah. We could not see. So for me, it didn't resonate any longer, and I had to really go to God, and I fought with it. And Bear and I had a lot of conversation.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to let go, and I don't always.
No, humans don't in general know how to let go of stuff.
Yeah, I am a control freak. So for me to let go was something I really had to do a lot of soul searching on, and my means of financial, paying my rent.
Stability.
And,
comfort.
My comfort.
Yep.
You know, my children live with me, my grandchildren live with me, my lovey lives with me, and I like to be able to make sure that my family is okay. So that's, you know, one of those little things in my addiction that I still haven't gotten rid of.
Right.
I got rid of all the other stuff. There's just a few things that I still need to work on.
Right.
That being one of them.
So we're rolling into the end of June, and everything looks like we are deciding or have decided that it's possible at the end of June was going to be it. We've had enough discussions to where the writing has not only been on the wall, but it's in document form, and we've decided that we're going to be shutting it down. The help that we were being given outside of us was tremendous, but at the same time, it was also difficult, made it harder. Because people are trying to say, well, I'm going to help you, and I'm going to help you, and I'm going to help you. And at the same time, I've been in business long enough to know that this was a dead thing. I knew that this was not going to be financially affordable for us to do this anymore. So here we are towards the end of June, and we had all our ducks in a row. We got things out, and we're organizing. We're even looking for someone to buy the business if they wanted it, or the machines if they want them.
Yeah.
And then
I was looking to sell it, close it down, and then sell it. But when it came to having the thought of somebody else buying what I had built, my thing from my company was always safety first, and it was really important that people be safe. And I didn't see people being safe anymore. There was no safety, anything.
The concerns about being safe or
concerns for others.
Yeah.
Was no longer around anywhere. Yeah. There was no compassion.
Because people were starting to get into we'll call it a desperate mode of making money. So if you got to make money, you got to lessen your concern about things like safety and people's well-being just to be able to roll in the dough. And that's not part and never was part of what you created for the Segway business.
That and simple, people on the back streets that we once knew, people were agitated and angry.
Yeah.
And these people who had always waved at us and been so kind, something had switched.
Yeah. So
and that was the final straw for me, and I was done.
So then we were just about ready to get everything completely done, and June 24th comes along. I'm walking my lovey over to her part-time gig. She had to go and use the potty break, so I walk her back to the potty area, assisting a couple other ladies to go in. As I step aside, I got hit by a car. Dropped me to the ground, cracked my back. I thought I was completely done because I was already feeling the effects of the Segway stuff. So I'm thinking I'm toast.
I heard him cuss outside the bathroom.
Yeah, I was in a lot of pain. And that to me was my done. Absolutely, I wasn't going to do another Segway ride at all. I was absolutely done. So if she was going to do it, she was going to have to do it herself, which was also not going to necessarily be in the cards. So
he got hit by the car on the 24th. The 25th, I did the last tour, and the 26th, we shut the doors.
Yeah. It was the end of an incredible era, emotional.
It was, but the last tour was so beautiful, and they prayed with us. It was heartwarming.
The last tour was the perfect group of 6 people. We had kids, we had adults, and we had grandparents. That was the essence of everything that has happened on Segways.
It was beautiful.
And these people were the ultimate in, if we could have had those people touring with us all the time. Mm-hmm. So the end of that era comes. We shut things down. We transition out. Laura Lee then commits to working her part-time gig and turn it into a full-time gig. And I'm kind of trying to figure out what I do with my body because I have a torn meniscus and a lower lumbar strain. So for me, hiking, I couldn't do it because I knew if I did, I'd make things worse. So I had to go through funny things over the summer and wait for stuff to happen before I could actually start getting into physical therapy and recovery and all that. But now let's turn the table to you. Now it's the end of an era, but the beginning of a new you. What was this new you going to be during the summer of 2020? What did it shape into?
Well, interesting. Everything in this year has been divine because I tried to buck the system when it came to Segway. I didn't want to give up on it. And it was one event after another, let me know. And I had to go to God, and God said, let go. The words were, let it go. Funny thing, let it go. And I think the birth of my grandson was kind of cool. I got to be in the room. I had to go to the hospital with my daughter, and I had to remain there. And we had to wear masks and all that good stuff. So
Crazy COVID.
Crazy COVID had changed everybody's life. Nobody could go in with her. Nobody could leave. So we stocked up on all the food that we needed and the comfort necessities. And I went to the hospital. were encompassed in this beautiful new birth. And isn't that what it's really all about anyway? The transformation, being rebirthed. It wasn't just
the ending of something and the beginning of something new.
Yeah, my business was ending, but it hadn't ended yet.
Yeah.
So we closed in June, at the end of June, but my grandson was born at the beginning of June. So it was that beautiful transition. Something was born and then something passed. Not only did my business pass, but my father passed 2 days after I closed the doors of Segway, or actually probably the next day. So once I had closed Segway, my father passed away. And for me, it was just interesting. A week before that, some funny things happened, and he had to go to the hospital, and I had to make some decisions for my father that he was unable to make for himself. And he'd been in a hospice facility, it's assisted living.
Assisted living.
And he'd been there for, quite some time, probably that one about 1.5 years, and had his own apartment. But when COVID hit, everything got locked down, so he could no longer come out and go shopping with me.
Or have visitors for
have visitors. Matter. I couldn't hug him. I couldn't hold him. And you know what happens to people that...
Yeah.
They don't have contact with other people. You begin to lose grips, right? You just need that human interaction and kindness and care. And he got lonely. Yeah. And he didn't die from COVID. But he did die.
He died because he was done.
Yep, my father had reached a point to where his body was just finished and his soul was very tired. I knew that the transition was happening because on a day that I was talking to him on the phone, Bear and I were in the car, and he was telling me about this event that had taken place. And in this event, he said, some people came in and they were wanting me to get dressed to come home. And he's like, it felt so real. He said, but I think it was a dream. Everybody here, the crew, doesn't know what I'm talking about. I told them that I was ready, and they said that they didn't know what I was talking about, meaning he had foreseen or saw in a dream or a vision that they had come in and told him, Marvin, get ready, get dressed, it's time to go home. And when I heard him say that they came in and told him it was time to go home, I knew that I was losing my dad.
Yeah.
It was very strange, and within a couple of days, he wasn't himself at all, and the facility had called me and said, every time he keeps falling, and I told them this time, I need you to just call the hospital, and I want him to go, and I don't want him to be able to deny it, so I'm doing an override. He'd fallen one more time, and I wasn't giving him the opportunity to make a decision, because there's a reason for him falling, and we just don't know what it is.
Right.
We had to get some answers. So he went into the hospital, and then as soon as he went into the hospital, I had one cohesive communication with him, and then there was nothing. So for 4 days, he didn't drink water, and he didn't eat food, and he had no communication, and the doctors called me in and told me that it was going to be probably his last day. And so my job was kind enough to let me go, and the Bear went and dropped me off at the hospital. And we didn't know how that was going to work, because once you go in and you leave, you leave. Once you were gone, you have to stay gone. Somebody else could then come visit, but
right.
We didn't know what that was going to look like. And with this COVID thing, we didn't have any idea what anything looked like anymore.
So as you're spending time with him, he's not responsive. He's not
coherent. There is no response.
He's not taking meds. He's not drinking water. He's not eating foods. So he's essentially on his checkout.
Yeah, he's
consciously, but not human-like consciously. In his spirit and his soul, he's already planned it. He's already ready, and he's making the checkout.
Yeah, we don't know what anything looks like. The doctor pulled me out, and he told me that they could give him a bunch of fluids or whatever. They could do something to make it more comfortable for him. But he basically hadn't had anything to drink or eat for 4 days. And what were my wishes? Because he had a do not resuscitate order, but before he checked out, and they talked about the do not resuscitate order, my dad said, no, resuscitate me, help me.
Right.
So there was a conflict there. So when I went there, I had made the decision that if Dad was going to go home, he was going to go home, and I was not going to have them stick him with anything and make life more miserable for him, because he was apparently sleeping. So I wanted him to be able to go home. So I figured, like any good daughter was going to do, is I would touch his face, and I would touch his hands, and I would tell him that I love him. And I would moisten his lips. And I noticed that his mouth would twitch. I would see, like goop in the inside. So I got this brilliant plan. I was going to clean out his mouth and moisten his lips a little bit. And I did. Yeah. So I put the sponge in his mouth. And the more I kept doing this, he all of a sudden started coming around to where he would squeeze the water out of the sponge. And we played this game for like an hour. And within 2 hours, he was blinking at me. And then he would smile at me. And I would talk to him, and his eyes would roll. And I saw my dad coming back. You have hopes.
Yeah.
And I saw him coming out of it, and I was like, well, shit. If all he needed was water, right, then maybe I was wrong. And...
the second guessing.
I did. I second guessed everything, and then the people were coming in going, oh my God. They didn't understand what was taking place, only they knew that it was because I was there. It was me. It was the love that he had for me.
It was her presence that was there. His daughter. There's a deeper relationship here, and we won't get into the details. But this man adored Laura Lee.
He's been my dad since about 1999.
He's not her biological dad. He just took the form because in their lives they both required a partnership in a certain way to be able to be father-daughter, and that's the way it worked. Yeah. So your coherent life, your non-addicted life, he had been a part of every step of it. So
he had been a part of my addiction.
Yep.
We spent the addiction together. We were both heavy-duty addicts. And the day I got busted is the day that we both got clean. He didn't use anymore. And he counted on me for his sobriety. And I leaned on him.
Yep.
For mine. Or with mine. And so we've gone through a lot of emotions together. I brought him from California out here to move. So we've got a deep history.
So we're going into this moment where he's starting to respond, but to you.
Yeah.
He starts communicating with you?
He starts talking, and when we talk, and, from my father, or my dad, I had really transitioned a lot and changed, so I would talk about God a lot with him. And he started saying, God is good, God is good. And I got to where I started videotaping, because I knew it was going to be our last experience.
Yep.
So I called every one of my children, and I put them on video chat where I could. And from the man that was laying there lifeless on the bed became a chatterbox.
Like usual. Like he was always.
But of course something was changed. The mind had taken over. It was trying to do its best to run its course, and he would talk about the thinking man, and we would watch the video on the screen, and you know how they got those videos in hospitals where they have the beautiful scenery playing. And
right.
He's like, oh, I know where that is. That's in Madagascar. That's in whatever. And I was like, you ever been there? Oh, yeah. Had never been there.
He was a great storyteller.
He was a storyteller. So I was with them from about 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon until about 9:30 that night. And those were my last hours with him. It was beautiful. It was what I needed. We both got closure.
Yeah.
I got to tell him how much I loved him. So there was no openings.
Yeah.
Everything came together very beautifully. So for me and for him, we were both blessed with being able to let each other know how much we meant to each other.
And as you guys heard before, the transition she had out of the Segway, the birth of her grandson, and then the passing of Marvin, all within a month's time.
Yeah, 3 weeks.
Right? So talk about interesting emotional ups and downs. But again, it was a year of clarity. It's not a year of COVID. This was a year of clarity.